101.1 FM KFUG Crescent City.
I'll light the fire. You place the flowers in the vase that you bought today. Staring at the fire for hours.
You are listening to New Culture Radio. I'm your host, Dan Schultz. This week we have creator of the channel Adapt 2030, David dubyne. Welcome to the show, David.
Dan, I appreciate you having me on for at least a discussion about one of the most important issues of our time that's not really being talked about in the corporate media, but should be because it affects all of our lives, this new grand solar minimum.
And I have to agree, this is the largest single event of our lives. And yet, what really gives it validity, David, is that it's suppressed on the internet. YouTube, Google, there is obviously a concerted effort to not give this light of day.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would say that the science is very solid behind these 400-year cycles in our sun. And see, that's the thing. It's a reset button for society every time one of these events occurs. Now, if you just look back at a history book, it's quite easy to find when the rise and the fall of empires, dynasties, kings, queens, fiefdoms, whatever you like to call it, shoguns, but they all follow the exact same timeline on these 400-year cycles. And it really all has to do with when the sun affects our jet streams and our magnetosphere. We're starting to see the most violent, extreme, unbelievable, crazy weather, which is really nothing yet to where we're going to go by 2021 or 2022. There's a couple of fingerprints in this grand solar minimum, and one of them would be rising food prices due to decreased crop yields, so that's one. The second would be a decline in the general economy because people are spending more on food. So if your food price doubles, you're going to have to spend more, which is going to contract the rest of the economy. And you look around, anywhere you look today, if you follow Zero Hedge, every other story is about a contraction story happening at the moment. It's just quirky how all these events are all lining up. The same fingerprints are occurring. And then the third part of this would be the population migration. And then, we have the perfect storm happening right now. And if you look at today's weather, the perfect storms are everywhere across our planet in the northern and southern hemispheres.
If you're a big picture person, this is fascinating, and it does bring a lot of the dots together in connection. I think if most people knew this was coming, they would just simply get ready. And the fact that they're trying to cloud the subject and forward this global warming narrative, which is clearly not true. You only have to look into it a little bit.
Yeah, and I wanted to respond to each and every one of those points. The first one being about the global temperatures. These IPCC reports they've said for how many years now? 40 years. It's run away. We've got to do something tomorrow or else the planet's going to collapse. I've heard that for 40 years of my life, and nothing has really changed. And the global temperatures are only not even 0.2 of a degree above the 1979 to today's averages. So when we're talking not even 0.2 of a degree warming over this entire baseline in satellite averages and at satellite temperatures since 1979, there's a serious disconnect between what they feed us in these reports and what's really happening on the ground.
The entire North Polar ice cap during some of the summer months could be completely ice-free within the next 5 to 7 years. Completely ice-free within the next 5 to 7 years.
I want to circle back to what you said about the 0.2 degrees increase over incline. I brought that up just 3 days ago, just to highlight this point that David's making. I had a conversation and I said to a global warming, man-made global warming believer, I said, it's only 0.2. I said, we can't even tell. Nobody can tell that there's warming on the planet. We're just taking some people's, and he said, well, I can tell. And I said, you are so full of shit. You can't tell if it's 0.2 degrees over the next hour. But over years and years, you can tell personally by feeling on your skin or breathing in the air, you can tell that it's 0.2 degrees higher. Come on. And he said, no, I can tell.
That'd be over decades, not years, too. Yeah. That's insane. But keep paying your global taxes for consumption for CO2. Keep paying your CO2 tax. Don't
Yeah,
ask questions.
and make up stuff that you can tell that it's 0.2 degrees higher than it was over decades.
Yeah, no, Dan, let me interject there. Now, if anybody wants to check out that reference point and, verify, it's all about verifying the data that we're talking about. And I encourage you to do your own research. Do not take what Dan and I talk about as fact. You need to back it up. You need to double check it, back check it, and do your own research, and then come up with what you feel is correct for you. So I'm going to take you to Dr. Roy Spencer's site. Dr. Roy Spencer, that's Spencer. Now, he's the director at the University of Alabama, Huntsville Satellite Temperature Data Center. So it's the UAH data set. It appears to me with all that record cold all last month across the U.S. and Canada and Europe and other places, it'll drop the temperatures down to almost baseline again globally during
What you're
this month.
saying is we've entered into full global cooling now.
My personal opinion is yes, at least for the next 12 years
I mean,
or so.
this year, the globe cooled in 2018. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's very well known. And when you have this debate with global warming proponents, just ask them, which data set are you referencing to get your number of believability? And if they don't have an answer for you, like, I just heard it from the IPCC and all the scientists say it, you need to actually sit them down and say, listen, there's a lot of data sets like remote sensing systems, University of Alabama, Huntsville, GISS, Climate Reanalyzer, and you can't even tell me where you're getting your data point to prove to me a point. And it's a great way to start a real peaceful conversation, because they're going to be shocked that you even know where to find these kind of temperatures. And it's a great way to bring them into the fold and actually have a real conversation without being offensive.
It is. I like to carry a thumb drive with me in my bag, my computer bag. And when I have the conversation, which I do with some regularity, I just say, hey, if you want to research it, here's 12 podcasts. But the other way that is really effective is just using the Socratic method. And like David says, you can have a peaceful conversation. And I like to just stop and listen. I say, really? So educate me. Tell me what you know about man-made global warming. And the best most people can do is come up with 2 or 3 sentences. 97% of scientists agree. There's a consensus, right? You can ask, do you know that that's true? Have you looked into that? Have you researched this? Have you really studied the subject? And of course, they haven't.
But we need the solutions. And that's one thing that I think should be brought to the forefront. We can talk about the problem all day long, which we're going to, but the reason is not to drive fear and all this, fear porn and all this getting you scared. And it's about showing you there is a problem. It's real. And if you can understand what it is, then you can make better, more informed decisions.
Yes.
Because fear is a paralyzer. And if you're able to offer those in your community or those around you understanding at the time when this fear comes, because, we just lost 10% of the global carryover stocks in wheat and grains across this planet right now. And that is a stunning number. Rye is down, and if you look at the newest USDA, that's the October 2018 report coming from the United States Department of Agriculture, they do the total for the global grains, and what shocked me was the carryover stocks, or really what's in storage or the silos, is down a full 10%. And the quality of grains were very poor. Protein content, people got really sick because their immune systems were depleted. They were eating bad foods. And you know what? That sounds exactly like a playbook reading last month's USDA and the Ag Facts and all these other persons that are putting out crop reports are talking about damaged heads, reduced kernel size. We got the potatoes a third smaller in Germany just because of weather events. The potatoes are behaving strangely. And you got reduced crop yields across the planet, poor quality wheat. Just we're seeing the exact 100% same things that we saw from the 1600s. Now, caveat here, we have a just-in-time delivery system. We have better irrigation. We have better seeds. We have mechanized, farming now, which they didn't have. But they were much hardier people. They knew how to repair everything themselves. Nobody knows how to repair anything. They grew all their food. We can't grow anything ourselves, barely. They had their own animals. We don't know how to do that. But we need credit on this planet to keep that just-in-time delivery system going. And if it's anything like happened back then, economies contracted 90% in some countries. 90 down. 90% contraction. Now, can you imagine what that will do to a just-in-time delivery system if we can't get credit? Because people don't pay cash for a container of beans or a container of goods coming in. They're rolling on 45, 90-day LCs to get these goods from point A to point B. What about the logistics companies? You think Maersk Line is going to, they're going to pay them cash to get your containers across the ocean? Everything revolves on credit. And you see a 90% contraction in any one developed nation, that's going to send ripples, and we're already barely holding on with the global economy anyway. You got all the housing things happening in the United States, all the contraction in China, interest rates going above 3%. If that doesn't continue to function, we're going to be just like they were, relying on what we grow in our local areas. And at that point, it wasn't enough to sustain the very, very small population. And one last thing, the population of the planet at that time was around 900 million to a billion people. There's 8 billion people on our planet right now. There's huge difference on the population numbers on our globe at the moment. More solutions from these people with their minds, perhaps. More mouths to feed. But what happens if our just-in-time delivery system breaks down? And what if the farmers can't get funding or get credit to get the seeds to be able to plant? That's going to lock up the entire food production system. The economy collapses in the 1600s were severe, stark, and lasted for generations after that.
I'd like to highlight David's point about 25% of the world's population died. We had a 25% reduction in world population in the 1600s in this Maunder minimum, this grand solar minimum, and all of the things David talked about. It's such an important point. They were hardy people back then. They knew how to live on the land. They knew animal husbandry. And with this massive increase in population, we're so disconnected from our food source. And everybody knows, I think, even if you don't have all the facts, people sense it, that there's a fragility to the economy. There's a fragility to society. There's more risk involved. If we have half of what happened in the last grand solar minimum in the 1600s, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and all those things you said were very true. And, that adds to the urgency of the situation. Okay, the science is solid. We know this is here. It's not coming. It's here already. The effects on the weather are just going to amplify from this point forward. We should be talking about solutions, and the corporate media keeps trying to deflect any time that these conversations come up. If you've seen, especially the BBC is the greatest example, they put out their notice to all the reporters, don't even entertain anything that doesn't talk about CO2, don't give them a floor, don't give them a platform, don't even respond to them. And that was pretty much now the message across the entire corporate news structure is, if they're not talking about CO2, don't even bring it up. Don't even debate them. Don't give them a floor. Just zero time for them. Mm-hmm. And see, that's the complete opposite of where we need to be. We need to be, all right, at the very least, what if this happens? And by next year, it'll be very apparent that it is not a what if.
That really, again, I think that validates our hypothesis in that there's nothing wrong with the exchange of ideas, of having a conversation. That's why we're doing this right now, David. We're taking time out of our lives to interject an intelligent argument that something has happened that is not CO2 based. And when they have to resort to controlling the narrative, to silencing, to deleting YouTube pages, to interfering with communications, to saying, we're not going to listen, la, 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 where they put their fingers in their ears, when they have to do that, it almost invalidates their argument. If their arguments were strong, if their arguments were valid and logical and irrefutable, they would just simply have the debate or engage in the conversation, but they refuse to do that. And the reason why is because it can't withstand the scrutiny. It just simply doesn't hold up, does it?
No, because if the science on the CO2 warming side was very solid, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation because I would be believing that. I ask you and beg you to look back through the last 7,000 years of climatic records. Why do they always stop at it's the warmest or coldest since the satellite record began? Oh, it's the warmest since 1850. Why do they always stop at those little tiniest points in time? 150 years of climate data, are you kidding me? We can very clearly see these ups and downs, up and down, and temperatures going back 7, 8, 12,000 years. And you talk about the younger Dryas, they always routinely stop charts that they ever show, even if it's a long-term chart. They always stop it before the younger Dryas. we were coming out of the last ice age, but the temperature dropped 17 degrees Celsius in a matter of 3 years. And then it was cold for quite a while, and then whoosh, it came right out, and it rose over 10 degrees Celsius in 2 years. And they're trying to tell you that a 2 degrees Celsius over 200 years makes a difference, and they can't prove it, but they don't ever want to talk about those gargantuan coolings and warmings.
We weren't human beings producing carbon dioxide back then. That's why they stop at the Younger Dryas.
But we do get these natural rises in temperature, natural drops in temperature. And what I did was I overlaid the collapse of Chinese dynasties on the GISP2 ice core data set, where they measured the temperatures with the ice cores. You know, the IPCC loves to talk about ice cores. Okay, well, I'm going to use their ice cores and take a look at the last, 3,000 years of temperature, plot on that the collapse of dynasties, and you will be shocked. You will not sleep for a week once you see the correlations of when the start and end dates are for collapse of Chinese dynasties, which I mapped out, the Kofun era, the collapse of, you take a look at the Japanese history, but when you come up to the Incan Empire, they rose and fell on those exact same temperature drops. Same with the Mayans, and we bring it over. How about the kings and queens in England? Moderate minimum. You got to be kidding me. They're fighting wars over food, and we can keep going back into the 1300s, and we start to see it. And everywhere you look across the planet, civilizations are on a wave crest when you take a look at these temperatures, because when it comes off the crest and goes into that trough, everything collapses. Take them back further in time, the CO2.
Yes, empires rise and fall with climate. In fact, real climatologists and astrophysicists talk about how we would welcome global warming. There's a strong association with abundance and the rise of civilizations with warm climates. Historically, that's when the planet thrives, when things get hot. It's the cold, and that's thus Robert Felix's book, Not by Fire but by Ice. He says that, you know, what we really, and so many climatologists talk about, what we really have to worry about is when it gets cold. And I want to get into this, some of the science of this right now, David. What happens when, especially with cosmic rays, maybe even people that listen to mainstream news know that in the past week, we've had KP0, several KP0 days with high cosmic ray influx. What happens when we get this increase in cosmic rays, and what does that cause? How is that affecting humanity?
It creates more cloud cover. The magnetosphere, when it gets really weak like that, these cosmic rays are allowed to bombard, and when they do, they create more clouds on our planet. Cosmic rays that are bombarding in here are at the highest levels they've ever seen, and they're predicting that we're going to go 30% higher than we've ever seen. It's generally up and continuing to go up. Now you're looking at also things like rainfall, oxygen-18 isotopes, beryllium-10, you know, what we're looking for the cosmic rays. But you can start to really map it out and go way hella back in cycles for, 500,000 years back to see the intensity of these cosmic rays. And they find, I swear, every time, it's a scary thing. When the cosmic rays increase, A, the rainfall increases. B, you get incredible amounts of volcanic ash in the air, because these cosmic rays, and I'll just say one last point, the cosmic rays excite magma chambers with silica-rich magma, and they cause massive, more frequent volcanic eruptions across the planet. And this is so quoted in science that they kind of keep it out of the science, because they don't want you to see what a statistical correlation it is between increases in cosmic rays, rainfall, and volcanic eruptions. Oh, and earthquakes, by the way.
I want to segue into the predictability, the timing of this. While I think that predicting specific times, it seems to be always kind of a dicey endeavor, we do have some really solid science. Zarkova's work comes to mind, that we know when to expect the intensification of this grand solar minimum. Maybe you could talk about, how long do we have until it gets bad?
Well, you mentioned Valentina Zarkova's work, and she was also another team of scientists out of Russia with Popov and Zarkov, but then there was an American there, Shepard, as well. I'm sorry, no, he's from the UK, Shepard. So their research And also with the Pulkovo Observatory with Dr. Abujamatov, and we got John Casey, former NASA Space Science Advisor, Piers Corbin. There's a whole bunch of people out there giving us these forecasts, and they're all exactly the same timeline. So it's not coming from just one single source. Please realize that. It's not a single person from a single country. It's around the world, and all these astrophysicists are telling us the exact same thing. The cooling is happening. It's intensifying, and the massive changes you're looking for are going to occur next year. Like, we're really out of time. And as we move forward to 2019 and 20, so the best way I can try to describe it is every weather change event that you've seen in the last 2 years, in terms of like massive flooding, superstorms, massive droughts, whatever it might be, you know, the Uber, like the once in a 1,000-year rainfall event. You know, Oman just got a year's worth of rain in one day. And, you know, these kind of events that you're starting to see, 6 months worth of rain in 3 hours in Spain last week. All right, so these events that you're seeing now, let's call that 1 unit of change. All those things that you've ever seen in the last year and a half of solid, just like incredible weather events, massive blizzards and things that make no sense, 16 feet of snow in Italy in a single storm. All right, that's 1 unit of change. But you got to realize we're going up 4 more units of change by 2021. To let that sink in your head, the strongest storms you've ever seen and heard about are going to amplify. So we're talking literally about 2 to 5 years worth of rain coming down in 3 hours in places. Stuff like a decade worth of rain coming down in a day in some places. This is where it's going to. And this is our crops aren't going to be able to handle it. The temperatures, the seasons are going to shrink. There's not going to be enough time to grow the food. It's going to be much longer winters, soggy or wetter planting seasons. And like we already saw, we got these freeze events already in the harvest season. We got part of the soybean crop buried under snow where they can't even see the plants. They lost $3 billion worth of crops up in Canada, and they're still counting the damage. And weirder and more intense.
Alberta entered a state of agricultural emergency.
Like a tornado in Algeria, and all-time record snows in Algeria going back 300 years. Yeah, those are outliers that aren't predicted by CO2, but would be predicted by the grand solar minimum because it's a once in a 400-year cycle. So last year, Algeria broke snow records back to like 289 years ago. Massive floods and tornadoes in Algeria. Is that a weather event that could be a grand solar minimum type of thing? I'm absolutely going to say yes on that because it matches too cleanly. You know, once in a 1,000-year rainstorm. This is what scares me.
There is an intensification happening, and what is really scary, listeners, is that if Zarkova's work and so many of these astrophysicists' work is accurate, if the predictors really come to pass, we're looking at something we've never seen. It doesn't mean that we're all going to die. It's nothing like that. It just means essentially food prices are going way up. I mean, that's the long and the short of it is, yes, you can be pelted by hail, and I'll show a lot of evidence that indicates that, yes, hail events are increasing in number and severity. They affect people, they affect crops. But when you plug this into the big picture of all the different systems of the economy, when people are spending double the amount on food, things are going to change in a big way for all of us in all the different arenas.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about extremes here for a second. So when you're looking for these types of events, now here's just some examples. This is off iceagenow.info. When you were talking, I looked here because I remember covering a few of these stories. You know, some of these locations are breaking their old records by 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, when you're talking about breaking a record, you know, usually it's by, a degree or a half a degree or maybe 1.5 degrees over, and that's an extreme break, maybe even 2 degrees. You're like, whoa, 2 degrees, I can't. For an all-time record cold event, or even an all-time record heat event, if you're breaking the old record from the 1930s generally on heat, it'll go up by like, 10th, 16th or something, a 1/6 of a degree. Well, no, it won't even generally be a full degree. If it is, that's like a super story. If it's 2 degrees, oh, wow, it's front page. But when you get these cold events this year, Wyoming, Nebraska, etc., they broke their old records by 15 degrees Fahrenheit on the cold side. And that's not even making the news. Another example in Alberta this year has been just what's happening there with the snow is astounding. You got to realize the old snow records for, somewhere in October would be like 3 inches. and then they'd be getting 2 feet, 24 inches. That is an astounding uptick. And we're starting to see this everywhere you go now, as well as in the United States. This last 2 weeks been just record snowfall everywhere. And if you hadn't heard about that, it's because the mainstream corporate media is not talking about it because it doesn't fit the global warming narrative. And you can't be having these record snowfalls and record cold completely out of season way in the first part of October when we're getting late December or early January temperatures.
I suspect
really fast.
that the grand solar minimum will be a household term by the real intensification, maybe by 2021, 2023. Certainly when we hit the extremes in 2030, the grand solar minimum must be a household term. In closing here, David, what does the whole thing mean to the listener, and what should they do about it? What are the solutions?
Well, the first thing would, you're going to have to learn how to grow your own food. That's a regardless. We're going to adopt more of a pioneering lifestyle. You're going to have to be responsible to be more self-sufficient. Now, with that being said, it's very difficult to do it on your own, so you're going to have to start working with your community more closely. Now, that community, who is it? Is it literally your neighbor, or is it a group of people who are like-minded? Like people working together that understand what's going on. Now, a community, if you're going to be growing food in your own garden, awesome. Are your neighbors with you? Do they understand what's going on? Because you have to look back at how these people survived and had thriving existences while others, their realities caved in around them. It's because they worked together. And you find that, this is the interesting thing, even though the 1600s were really traumatic for quite a few people, they found that where people were most tight-knit in terms of like religious beliefs and cultural beliefs and just morals, if you will, like the way they knit themselves so tightly that they depended on each other for their own lives, and the way they worked together as a cohesive unit. And those were some of the strongest communities because they had like-mindedness around them and they cooperated together. Get with other people who've already done it before you. Learn from others who've done it already.
I frame this subject...
Same with prepping, same with everything else.
Not
right?
as we need to be scared, as you said at the beginning of this program, but as a real opportunity. There are all kinds of good reasons to grow your own food anyways. There are all kinds of good reasons to connect with our neighbors and our community in cooperation. In fact, one of the arguments that I make is that we are genetically hardwired. As human beings, our system is hardwired to have a relationship with the land and a relationship with community. And we're not really even happy unless we do that. We are designed to have those two integrally involved in our day-to-day life. And so I think there's really good reasons to do it, whether the grand solar minimum is coming or not. But the fact that it is here, and we are going to have to dip our consciousness in survival, in togetherness mode, I think is a tremendous opportunity for us to rise to the occasion, because we're all in this together. We can't even just all go in these little communities over here and we all have enough food and the 90% of the people in the county are going to starve. That's not going to happen. That's not what happened in the Soviet Union when it collapsed. People from Moscow went and raided the farms. You can't just go be your own island. We are all in this together. And so I really have a deep appreciation for your channel, for all the people sounding the truth bell on this, to have an intelligent dialogue, to do your own research, and to find out what change is happening right now, because I think most people feel that big change is coming. And this grand solar minimum ties it all in together. It makes a lot of sense. You can look up the actual studies, you can find the science behind it and validate it. And when you do, it might be a little scary. And then you can say, you know what? I've got time to prepare. Let's take these actions that you're talking about, David, and let's not only do them so that, ooh, I don't die and we can all survive, but for all the really good reasons, because it's soulful work and it's healthy work, and we're more complete whole human beings. Closing statements, David?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the energetic changes that you just referenced there. So as we move forward with the magnetosphere weakening and our sun weakening further, Like people are starting to really feel intuitively that something is just off. And, I don't care where you go, who you talk to, everybody around the world is feeling that it's just off. Something's off. Hey, did you know the sun has a lot of effects magnetically on our planet? And since you're an electromagnetic being too, a receiver, if you will, all these changes magnetically on our planet are also affecting the human psyche because we're electric beings. So as our sun decreases in its activity state, affecting the weather patterns, the jet streams, the human mind is also, and body is being affected. The cosmic ray density, they don't allow aircrew to fly more than a certain amount of hours. Yeah, this is well-known science that strokes and heart attacks are triggered by these different events from our sun. And there's well-known science on these events of energy and charged particles affecting human behavior, human psyche, human health. Because our society has been structured in such a way that it hasn't been unfazed by these energetic changes for almost 4 centuries. We're entering into the age of Aquarius. Throughout almost every tradition across the planet, they pegged this time right now with some special energetic changes to come. And with Robert Felix's book, Magnetic Reversals and Genetic Leaps, he's talking about the same thing. Some of these cosmic ray bombardments have just had evolutionary leaps in years.
A changing consciousness.
And something's changed physiologically and literally physically in us from all these cosmic ray bombardments that have experienced. Yeah, exactly. So with these changes electromagnetically, I think they're going to turn on conduits and unlock doors of perception in our minds that will allow us to work together. This is the new energetic level, the vibrations raising. That's why a lot of these old institutions are having a very difficult time holding on. What would be considered complete subservience without even asking a question 2 centuries ago. Now there's people pelting them with rocks and demanding resignations and jail time, etc. That's unthinkable even 50 years ago. So there's definitely some changes in awareness that are just sweeping across the planet.
YouTube channel Adapt 2030, ADAPT 2030. He goes through the scientific literature, the different weather events. You're not going to get this stuff on the mainstream news. They're suppressing it. And when you see what he has to show you, I strongly suspect it will change your consciousness as well. Thank you, David.